Hey guys, it's Dr. Justin Marcagiani. Welcome to the Beyond Wellness Radio podcast. Feel free and head over to justinhealth.com. We have all of our podcast transcriptions there, as well as video series on different health topics ranging from thyroid to hormones, ketogenic diets, and gluten. While you're there, you can also schedule a consult with myself, Dr. J, and or our colleagues and staff to help dive into any pressing health issues you really want to get to the root cause on. Again, if you enjoy the podcast, feel free and share the information with friends or family, and enjoy the show. Hey guys, it's Dr. Justin Marcagiani here. I'm really excited for today's podcast. We're going to be talking about how to retrain your brain, your amygdala, and heal from trauma with Ashok Gupta. Ashok, really great to have you today. How you doing? Welcome to the show.
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Lovely to be here.
Awesome. Well, in the functional medicine world, dealing with a lot of chronically sick people that have hormone issues, gut issues, when you're doing a really good history on someone, you see a commonality in that there's a lot of underlying emotional trauma that usually can be a big stressor in that stress bucket that's holding back healing. And so I wanted to get you on the show because you're an expert in this and you have a program that really works on getting to the root cause. So I wanted to just kind of first talk about kind of, what you're passionate about and kind of what your goal is with your program out of the gates.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give a bit of background to myself, so I actually suffered from a chronic illness many years ago when I was studying as an undergrad at Cambridge. So I actually suffered from ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome. And it was, I was a young guy in my early 20s, had my whole life ahead of me. And suddenly I have this brick wall, which is a chronic illness. And I'm seeing doctors and specialists, and they're telling me, we don't know what causes it. There's no treatment for it. You may have this for the rest of your life. Good luck. Essentially, And I remember in my darkest moment thinking, this is the worst thing ever. If I can just get myself better, I met thousands of others who are suffering from this, and I said, if I can just heal just one person, just even myself, I will dedicate the rest of my life to helping people with this condition. That's how serious I was about it, and that spawned a lifelong quest to understand these conditions and really treat them. So I did a lot of research into brain neurology, understanding these conditions, and eventually I came up with a hypothesis. I got myself completely 100% better using very ad hoc brain retraining that I created.
Yeah.
And also have a clinic to treat others and have published other papers as well. So that's been my journey. So my real passion and vision here is that I believe that brain retraining, as we refine it better and better for these conditions, could be the future to treat chronic illness. And I want that to be embedded in primary care, and that is my mission.
That's excellent. Now, I know you talk about with your Gupta program, we'll put links down below so you guys can access this. I know there's some kind of introductory, offers on the website where you can kind of take a look and kind of dip your toe in and see if you like it. You talk about neuroplasticity, which is obviously, rewiring the brain in a sense, so these neurons can connect in different ways. But you also talk about the amygdala, which is kind of the part of the brain. It's like an almond size, and it's all about processing fear and threatening stimuli. And so when someone is chronically ill, is that part of the brain overactive where you're seeing everything as a threat and it's kind of always on? Talk a little bit more about the amygdala and how that plays in to these chronic health concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always like to start this explanation with the biggest question of all: why are we here? And I'd love to have a half an hour long conversation about the philosophy of that. But let's say from a scientific perspective, we're here because this brain, this body, this nervous system has been trained over millions of years to adapt to the environment, to survive, and pass on the genes to the next generation. So from a Darwinian perspective, this system is designed to adapt, thrive, survive, and pass on genes. And this has come from, plants, single-cell organisms, invertebrates, vertebrates, reptiles, mammals, human beings. All of that DNA and that growth is all within our own DNA. And in fact, we share around 50% of our DNA with a banana, which I was
right. Really that's crazy.
So our DNA actually contains a lot of the DNA of other animals as we've evolved to get to where we are. So the system is designed to survive. So the number one priority of our bodies is not actually well-being or health. The number one priority is survival. And if we take that as a starting point, the way that these illnesses start is that, let's take the example of COVID and long COVID, because we know millions are suffering from long COVID and the after effects. So imagine we get a COVID infection. Normally, our bodies trigger the immune system, they're able to fight off the virus, then the system resets, goes back to normal, and we have our health back. But in a small number of cases, well, actually 10 to 20% of cases, what happens is if our system is a little, let's say, tired, fatigued, or we are mentally, emotionally, physically overdoing it, then the system is more vulnerable. So when the virus comes, our immune system thinks, right, we've got to really fight hard because our system's weak. So it over responds towards the virus. And we know that, for instance, people who pass away from COVID, they're not passing away from the infection, they're passing away from the cytokine storm and the overinflammation from the body itself. And so what happens is, in COVID, we believe that the system over responds. We still manage to fight off the virus, but it's left a legacy in the brain, which is, let's err on the side of caution because maybe the virus is still here. So the brain continues to trigger the immune system and the nervous system inappropriately, creating this cascade of symptoms in the body. And we believe the culprit, as you've mentioned, is the amygdala and the insula. So the amygdala, we believe, is where the core conditioning lies, as well as the paradox Gray. The core conditioning lies in terms of triggering the nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system. And then for the immune system, we know now from animal studies that a lot of this comes from the insular part of the brain. The insular part of the brain is getting over-triggered and overstimulated. So both these structures keep triggering these over-defensive responses, creating symptoms in the body, and the brain detects in a hypervigilant way all of these symptoms in the body which come up to the brain. The brain says, oh, maybe we're still in danger. Yeah, just like in this diagram. The brain at number 9, we're still in danger. Then triggers at number 4 and 5, the chronic sympathetic arousal, the immune dysfunction, HPA abnormalities, which then creates the symptoms at number 6. And then at number 8, the brain, because it's hypervigilant and hypersensitive, magnifies these signals. They come back into the brain at number 9, and we get caught in this vicious cycle. And this is a vicious cycle of a lot of these different conditions. And the only difference here with certain illnesses is fibromyalgia is pain-oriented, chronic fatigue is immune-orientated, such as well as long COVID. But we also get sensitivity reactions to the external environment. So mold disease, chemical sensitivities, mast cell activation. This is where external triggers, even food sensitivities, external triggers now create this cascade and this vicious cycle. And an analogy, I don't know, Dr. Joe, you were a fan of Game of Thrones, any chance?
Yeah, it's a great show. Yep.
So let's take the example of, imagine you're the king of the castle, okay? And your kingdom is suffering a drought. And your army is the sympathetic nervous system, and your navy is the immune system. So imagine the kingdom's weak because of the drought, and in comes an incoming army, an invading army with some dragons over the hill, right? So then your immune system and nervous system, your army and navy, responds, they fight off this invading army. But because they're weak, it takes them a lot longer to fight it off. Once they've fought it off, they come to you as king of the castle and say, hey, Dr. J, we only just managed to fight off that incoming invader. We need all of the resources of the kingdom and the castle now channeled to us. So all the wheat, all the corn, all the metal, everything comes to us. And you agree because it makes sense. And so now all the resources of the body go to the army and navy. And then even if a child is walking over the hill, the army and navy respond as if it's a full-blown threat and trigger war machines, using up all the resources. And hence we get stuck in that alternative way of being, that lack of homeostasis. And so brain retraining is saying, actually, we need to persuade the generals of the army and navy that we are no longer in threat, no longer in danger, to switch off these responses and go back to normal. So that, in a nutshell, is the hypothesis.
That makes sense. I mean, it's good to have an amygdala that's making connections, that's processing threat. It's like if there was this woods over here and bears would come out and eat a human, there'd probably be natural inclination to have some fear and anxiety about being close to that because we already know there's a threat that could take your life. So it's good to have this level of fear and perception. The problem with a lot of trauma today is it's firing off like it would take your life, but it's really maybe not that serious anymore. And we kind of have to, we need to have this rational discussion with our amygdala and our brain. Hey, this isn't maybe as much of a threat. And so obviously may not be able to do that from a conscious ability where we can just have that conversation. So what type of modalities are you incorporating to make that connection? Hey, this shouldn't be the threat that it is. My amygdala is hyper responding. It's like having an allergy response to dander in the air like it's a virus. Well, we shouldn't be responding that way. So what type of modalities are you using or techniques within your program to kind of get that response to be more appropriate and realistic?
Exactly. And as you say, traditionally, these types of approaches have been applied to emotional reactions or trauma reactions.
Right.
Okay. So the emotional side. But how do we communicate with our immune system? Right. It's a very, very different approach. And so what we've done over the last 20 years is develop a system and set of processes that actually communicate with these unconscious brain structures about physical health. Yeah. And you might say, well, hang on, this, how on earth can you do that? How can we kind of change our physiological responses? But, as we know, the power of visualization is very, very powerful. So let's take the example of a lemon, right? So imagine I take a slice of lemon and I place it on your tongue, but you don't bite into it yet. It's really tangy, really sour. Just on your tongue, and you bite into that sour lemon. Just imagine doing that. And imagine all the saliva starts coming up. Now imagine, so have you got saliva coming in your mouth, by the way?
Oh, yeah. The visualization, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So isn't that incredible that we've been able to create a physiological response just through the power of imagination, even though it's not real consciously. So we can bypass the conscious processes, and imagination and visualization is one aspect, because that's one aspect of this brain retraining. But there's plenty of other processes. So there's a 7-step process where we get people to recognize these unconscious danger signals, to then process them, and then actually create a safety response to the brain. Say, hey brain, we are safe. We are not in danger. You can switch off these immune responses and these defensive responses. And that uses a number of different techniques, including self-coaching, breathing, visualization and imagination, and also physical touch as well. So there's a number of different processes, and that's supported through meditation and breathing as well.
That's excellent. So what's the first step out of the gate, right? We start out of the gate. What's the first thing we're going to do to kind of move the needle? Is it just breathing? Is it really just making sure we're breathing to the nose, having a deeper breath? What's the first step out of the gate?
So out of the gate, before our brain is ready to be retrained, as you say, it needs karma, right? So it's a bit the idea of, until we're able to accept something first and be calm, we can no longer shift. The brain's not so flexible if we are stressed and anxious. So I give the example of, if a husband and wife coming home after a hard day's work and they have an argument, because they're both stressed, that's the worst time for them to have an argument. But if they calm down, relax, etc., then they're more likely to have more conducive conversation. So in the same way, we calm our brains first through breathing and meditation. So they are supportive techniques. And then we look at the brain retraining. So that's the second R. So the first R is relaxing the brain. The second R is retraining the brain. And that's where I talked about these unique processes. And the third is re-engaging with joy. And this is something that is often neglected in mainstream medicine, which is, we know that actually when people are able to connect with things that uplift their spirit, that bring them joy and happiness, their immune system is bolstered. They actually are able to heal from a wide range of different conditions. So we teach people to recognize what can boost their immune system and reset it, using this idea of re-engaging with joy, which is, I think, is a missing piece of medicine.
Excellent. And then what type of, I know like NLP's been out there for a while where they use a lot of visualizations and really focus on the pictures kind of in your brain. How much does visualization and just kind of the images that come within your brain? Because a lot of times people have a fear, there's almost always the image of that thing before that fear is felt. How do you start to change the images in that brain? And maybe the self-talk, a lot of times most people wouldn't be friends with the person if their self-talk was emanated in a friend in front of them. The amount of self-talk that's so negative and so putting themselves down, if it was a friend in their real life, they would never be friends with that person. How do you change the pictures and the voice inside the brain? So
this is a great question. And the core of this is repetition and self-love. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit like, imagine that self-talk is a precocious 7 or 8-year-old child, right? And we know kind of children who get really anxious about something. If you tell them one time, hey, this is nothing to worry about, they're not going to listen. But with that love and that compassion and that repetition of, look, hey, we're safe, there's nothing to worry about, you can calm down. Through that process, you're able to gradually get the brain to recognize we're no longer in danger. And so repetition is absolutely key. And imagination and visualization is part of it, but not the only part of it. Any change in life involves awareness. We have to be aware, first of all, of what is that negative self-talk? What does it look like? Let's write it down. Let's be very clear what is creating this vicious cycle. So that's the first step, is awareness. And from that point onwards, the next step is acceptance. So a lot of people have these conditions, but don't accept that they have this condition. They're constantly fighting it, pushing against it. They're tensing up against it, resisting it, which then creates more anxiety and more turmoil. So first step, awareness. Second step, acceptance. Then the third step is this process of repetitive retraining of the brain again and again and again, until the brain gets the message that we aren't in danger and switches off these responses. And that's the core of how we get people well.
Very good. So what's the next step? So your program out of the gates, what, 28 days?
Yeah, so we offer a 28-day free trial where people can access some of the videos, some of the audios, and get a flavor of the program and see if it's right for them. So that's the first starting point. We'd love people to experience the free stuff that we've got, lots of great videos. And if they choose to take the full program, then it is what we call a 6-month program. Now, why do we say 6 months? Because that seems like a long time. Actually, many people retrain within weeks and months, but we don't want people to become complacent, because I'm sure, Dr. J, you've seen in your practice as well that people get well from some kind of protocol, but then as soon as a new stressor comes into their lives, wham, all the symptoms come back again. Yeah? So teach people not only to get well, but to stay well, to recognize our stress triggers, to recognize what brings back these symptoms, and to control that, and to recognize that for the rest of their lives. We want people to stay well. So we call it a 6-month program because we want people to get so deeply into retraining that it becomes part of their lives, and so that they can maintain that health for the rest of their lives.
That's great. And what do you find? I mean, obviously the goal is to try to activate some of the parasympathetic nervous system response, right? If that amygdala is overactive, then we're in that sympathetic fight or flight. That can shut down digestion, enzymes, hydrochloric acid, can cause cortisol and adrenaline fluctuations. That can cause, the more stressed you are, the more you dump out your electrolytes, your potassium, magnesium. That causes the heart to go faster. So you can see this downward cycle with this sympathetic nervous system response with all the different hormonal systems, digestive system. What's when you do breathing, right? What's the type of breath pattern that you find to be the most effective that you incorporate?
Right, so there are several. The first is deep diaphragmatic breathing, following a 4-4-6-2 pattern. So that's when people put their one hand on the stomach, one hand on the chest. Many of us are breathing very shallow from the chest, and we know that parasympathetic breathing is all from the belly. The belly is going out and in as we breathe. And so this is actually a technique that's taught in the Art of Living course, Art of Living breathing, which I don't know if you've heard about, but that's a very powerful breathing technique. Part of their breathing technique is to actually breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 6, and hold for 2. All through the nose. All through the nose. So we know that actually in and out through the nose, what that's able to do is calm that nervous system, and it's been used for millennia. And another technique is alternate nostril breathing as well. So you breathe it in through one nostril, breathe out through the other nostril, then in through that nostril, out through the other ones. So that's another very well-known breathing technique called alternate nostril breathing. In Sanskrit, it's called Nadi Shodham. And these techniques,
you're breathing in, out, do the same, and then switch. So in, out, then switch.
Yeah. So no, what you're doing,
when you do that,
you're breathing in through one, then breathing out through the other.
Oh, okay.
And then breathing in through that one, and then breathing out through the other, and then breathing in through that, and then breathing out through the other. Yeah. And
very good.
What people find is gradually, as they control the breathing, but not control in an anxious way, but just observe it, the breathing becomes slower and deeper using that process. It's balancing the left and right hemispheres of the brain. That's one of the roles of alternate nostril breathing. And so that combined with regular meditation is a starting point. What that is able to do is to tell the brain, hey, just calm everything down at a generalized level, and then we'll be ready to retrain those specific neurons that have got caught in this vicious loop to indicate that we're in danger. And so that is a very complementary approach. And I think what happens is in modern medicine, we have this reductionist philosophy of, okay, now what we need to do is test breathing techniques over here and see what impact they have. And now we're going to test meditation techniques over here in a separate randomized controlled trial. But actually, it's the cumulative effect of all of these things together which is able to persuade the brain to switch off these danger responses. So that is the most important thing, is to have all of these things operating at the same time.
That's excellent. That's very cool. So I like the breathing aspect, and the goal of that is what, to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. What should your brain be focusing on? Should it just be focusing on the breath? When do you start to incorporate the trauma or whatever that memory is that's triggering you? I don't know. Let's say you got in the car accident. Every time you jump in the car, you're reliving that trauma. When do you start bringing those pictures or that experience in to the work?
So first of all, our program is not necessarily a trauma relief program. Yeah, although people use it for that and they do find relief from the trauma. And as you say, the purpose of the way that we teach breathing and meditation is that, yes, images will come up as you meditate. Some of them might be frightening. People sometimes spontaneously burst into tears as they're experiencing these types of techniques. And the most important thing is not to get caught up in any imagery or any emotions, just to observe it. So we're not pushing away any of it, and we're also not trying to obsess about it. We are staying calm and centered as we observe with a curious mind the images and the negative things that may come up. And that is one way and one technique of releasing trauma, is to simply observe with a neutral, friendly mind. Allow it to just come up without trying to pick it apart or try to analyze or understand it. And what we say is that actually people can heal from chronic illness without actually having to heal their trauma. This is so important because I think this is mistaught sometimes. For most people, they had trauma in their lives, but they didn't have a chronic illness that layered on top. So the best thing is to remove that layer of chronic illness and then deal with the underlying trauma. At the same time, there's no fixed dogma here. Of course, if people want to address their underlying trauma at the same time, that's absolutely fine. And some people do. Ultimately, treating and healing the chronic illness first, we find, is most effective, because if you have a chronic illness and you're trying to overcome trauma at the same time, that's a lot to actually process and deal with.
That makes sense. And so you get the breathing stuff going on. You're really working on the self-love, right? That's important. And do you incorporate any tapping or eye movement stuff? I know there's a lot of big techniques like EFT or EMDR and different things. Do you incorporate those modalities in your program?
We have another technique called the accelerator process, which is something that we've created, and that does not involve tapping necessarily. But a lot of our coaches trained in EFT and other modalities. So we give a core set of techniques to the patients, and if they want tapping, if they want some of these other things, and many of our coaches are trained in those modalities as well. So that's if people need one-on-one support. So our program is an online program which people can go through at their own time, at their own pace, and there's extra support from coaches as and when required.
That's great. What other modalities? We're going to put links down below. So if anyone listening wants to try the 28-day course, that's going to be an option down below in the links, as well as the whole 6-month program. If you feel like you're getting success and you want to continue with that good consistency, we'll put links down below. What's another good thing for listeners at home to start to incorporate to start improving their mental health and calm down that amygdala response, that fear response?
So I think regular meditation, first of all, is incredibly important. And then secondly, and this is the core point of retraining, is just awareness of the noise. Yeah, to regularly check in with yourself. And that's a mindfulness technique. Say, to think about what you're thinking about. How interesting, I'm thinking about that. And to actually write these things down, to have what we call a worry diary. Yeah, not that we want to reinforce it, but kind of getting stuff out of your head and onto this worry diary, almost like a journaling type process. So what kind of thoughts have I had today? Let me get it out of my head and journal it. Okay, I'm worried about this. I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about this. Just that process in and of itself is amazingly therapeutic and healing, because you're no longer got this churning going on. You've exhausted it. Get it out of your system. And with journaling, then you recognize all of these patterns and then say, what do I choose to substitute these patterns with, this churning thoughts and emotions? What do I choose to kind of say in it, what we call the loving messages? What loving messages do I choose to give back to my unconscious to oppose or heal these kinds of patterns that are going on? I think that's something that we can all do in the general public. And what we're doing in brain retraining with a 7-step process that we have, that's more when the patterns are extreme, when we've got such an extreme, almost traumatic pattern that actually self-talk isn't going to shift it. We actually need something really powerful to train the brain, not just rethinking, but training the brain out of these responses. And that is that deep work, that deep repetition of these neuroplasticity techniques.
That's very good. Excellent. Now, when I work with patients, I look at physical health, right? Which
Mhm.
could be structure of the body, injuries, under exercise, over exercise, the chemical health, which is important. That plays a big role. Diet, nutrition, sleep, hydration, gut health. Of course, if your nutritional health is poor, your physical health is poor, and you're inflamed, you're sore, your diet's junky, you're not sleeping, that obviously spills into your emotional health. I mean, try dealing with your taxes after you didn't sleep for a night. Emotionally, you're going to be a wreck.
Mhm.
How much do you plug in the nutritional component or the chemical stressors? How much do you try to plug that in to also help the emotional health?
Yeah, definitely. We're a holistic approach. Absolutely. So we kind of focus on the brain retraining, but we say that, as you say, if you have all of these things not working in your life, then it's not going to make the difference. So we have something called the anti-inflammatory diet, but we call it the
Hmm.
80% diet because some people go on these
Hmm.
very strict diets and get even more stressed by having to stick to
Yep.
this very strict regime. And so we have the anti-inflammatory diet, then we have natural anti-inflammatories, so turmeric, ginger, all of those
Yeah.
kinds of
Hmm.
things. And so plenty of supplements, and then the things that generally are missing in diets where people have overstressed themselves. So that's things like vitamin D, that's magnesium, that's
Yeah.
all of those types of natural supplements, the omegas, all of those things we know are generally good for our health. And then so there's anti-inflammatory diet and supplements, and there's also the sleep hygiene. So getting the sleep hygiene right. And when we're overstimulated and overstressed, then our sleep is one of the first things that gets compromised. And regular meditation, regular breathing has been shown to improve our sleep rhythm. So that's part of it. And then also,
Yes.
what we do in those last 2 or 3 hours before you go to sleep is incredibly important. And so we look at things that people can do that have been shown to deepen sleep and lengthen sleep as well. And then also the importance of getting out into nature. Nature is
Mm.
incredibly healing. And so walking in nature, and the importance actually of UV rays. So the importance of being in
Yes.
sunlight, especially during these summer months, is fine, but in the winter months, how difficult it is and how people feel worse during the winter months, simply because of two things. Number one, they're not getting exposure to daylight at the right times, but then secondly, their physical body is not absorbing UV rays and therefore not producing vitamin D, but also all of the other aspects of sunlight that are incredibly important for our bodies. And so we look at how people can do the best during the winter months as well. So those kinds of things are definitely incorporated. But ultimately, what we find is when people have come to us, they've already been down these avenues. So they've been to nutritionists, they've been to dietitians. They generally have been on top of their diets. They're trying to sleep as well as they can. But in
Right.
peace, their brain is overstimulated no matter what they do. How can they focus on that and retrain that? And sometimes we find people retrain their brains and then they've spent thousands on supplements and they can just stop all the supplements and it makes no difference, right? Because the supplements are there and important when our system is overstimulated. But once it's reset itself and we're calm, then actually our bodies don't need so much of this supplementation. It's just very natural.
That makes sense. Well, anything else, Ashok, you want to share with the listeners that you think would be powerful or something else they could be working on incorporating?
Yes, I think one of the most important pieces of advice I give to people is there can be very well-meaning support groups and doctors and whatever who have a kind of, how can I put it, a kind of negative approach, which is, hey, there's no cure for this. There's nothing that can help these conditions, and you're on your own, and don't believe that people get better. So sometimes we have people getting better through brain retraining, and they'll go back on these forums, and people will say, oh, well, you didn't have the condition in the first place. That's the only way you could have
Right.
got better. And the hope that I want to give to people is that whether it's through our program or through other modalities, people do heal from these chronic conditions, such as chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, mold illness, and long COVID. People do heal. People do get better. So never give up on your ability of your body to heal. And the great news is that I believe there is nothing actually fundamentally wrong with the body, in that there's not organic damage in the longer term. That's what we've certainly noticed. It's a functional issue where the body and the brain itself is overstimulating its own systems, creating a vicious cycle, which is keeping the body in this altered state. But if you fix that, the body can actually go back to health. And that's the hope that I want to give to people. Don't think that my body is weak, it can never get better. Once you get the right key to the right lock, you can unlock your health, unlock the healing potential of your body.
That's great. I love that. Now, I mean, it's really interesting because you see conventional psychiatry with a lot of people that have trauma. For the most part, they're going to recommend some kind of an SSRI or antipsychotic or a benzodiazepine, which is really just dampening or numbing the body's response to that. And a lot of times that brain response is there for a reason, and just numbing it out tends to, over time, that problem tends to get worse because you're just ignoring the reason why it's there. How do you work with patients that are already on conventional medicines that are just kind of dampening and covering up the issue versus getting to the root? How do you make that transition?
It's a huge scandal. First of all, we
Mhm.
have many people come to us who've been on benzos and have benzo withdrawal, SSRIs, and it's a huge scandal because these things, even when they're originally prescribed, are supposed to be for a few weeks at a time. They're not supposed to
That's
be a
really it. Yeah,
long-term dependency. And then when that dependency is there, when people try to come off these medications, they feel even worse than they did when they first started. So it's kind of licensed drug dealing to an extent. Now, of course, if anyone's listening, I don't want anyone to stop the medications. Of course, you do that in on the auspices of your doctor or psychiatrist. But actually, what we do is say, keep your medication the same for the moment,
yep,
work with brain retraining, get your system calm and stronger, and only then very slowly come off the drugs in association with your doctor. That's incredibly important because some people get super excited and then suddenly have cold turkey withdrawal, and it can actually cause more problems. So they need to come off these drugs very, very slowly. And so we actually have in benzo forums, many people using our program to come off benzo. So they're slowly coming off benzos whilst using our program to calm the nervous system and retrain any negative patterns that are coming from it. And once again, this dampening that you've described, when the brain is dampened down, it over responds and says, hey, I'm trying to alert you to danger, but you're dampening me down.
yes, yes,
Let me
exactly.
over trigger responses from the amygdala to keep warning you. So emotions are warnings that either an emotion hasn't been resolved or there's an attitude that we're taking to life which is non-conducive, or a belief system which is non-conducive. And the problem with modern psychiatry is that it's following the same reductionist medical model of come to see me, you've got 10 minutes with me, let me figure out what's going on and let me prescribe you drugs. But that model is not even fit for purpose for modern medicine and medical conditions, never mind psychiatric and emotional conditions. It's even worse for that.
Correct.
And so actually, recognizing that there's nothing wrong here when we experience those types of extreme emotions, it actually just requires a lot more talking therapies and neuroplasticity approaches to help us understand the deeper messages of these conditions.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, what if we kind of take the, connection with modern day psychology where it's kind of cognitive behavioral techniques and talk therapy? Why is that not enough sometimes? People can be in therapy for years and years and years, and it's like they haven't even gotten over it. Obviously, it's good to have communication, it's good to have dialogue, it's good to talk about the issues, but why is that not enough all the way?
Now, CBT is very effective at certain things, such as mild to moderate depression. It's shown to be effective. Certainly, anxiety can be useful. But the issue is that the difference between CBT and brain retraining or neuroplasticity approaches, first of all, when people are going through CBT, they are rewiring their brains as well. So let's be very
Right.
clear. It's not
Yep.
any therapy that we're taking ultimately is rewiring the brain, any change or shift that we're making. But we often find that CBT is like it's like taking a fire extinguisher to a house fire, right? It can certainly help, but in certain instances, if the house fire is very, very powerful and huge, it actually requires the fire truck to turn up and actually deal with the blaze. Yeah. And so the difference between CBT and some of these neuroplasticity brain retraining approaches is the intensity and the repetition of it. So, imagine learning to drive a car, right? So, learning to drive a car, imagine on the first lesson, your first day, CBT is like thinking, okay, I'm now aware of my negative patterns about learning to drive, and I'm going to be aware of them, and I'm going to shift to more positive belief systems, etc., etc., etc. Let me see what's blocking me. But that isn't going to train your brain to learn how to drive. But
Mm,
neuroplasticity is saying, right, let me practice pressing the gas, using the gear stick, as you guys call it, moving the
yep.
steering wheel. And we're training that into our nervous system through repetition again and again and again and again until it becomes automatic and our brain gets it. Right, I know how now to drive a car. Yeah. So that's how it's different to CBT. CBT could certainly do that, but it would take a lot longer. This is about actually training the brain repeatedly, intensively to get the message.
That's very good. And what kind of movement do you incorporate with your program? Is it just something as simple as, hey, just get out and walk, get out in nature, breathe, get some sun, or do you recommend any other specific types of movements like resistance or interval training? How does the exercise component work?
For many of our patients, they have to pace themselves very carefully because they've got
Hmm.
intense amounts of fatigue. And so
Right.
initially, we're asking them, some of them are bedbound. So we say initially, gentle stretching is enough. So that might be some Tai Chi,
Hmm.
it might be some yoga. So as long as you're moving and stretching the body, then if people can manage more, then walking in nature. So that can be, there's two types which are shown to be effective. So forests and fields and countryside
Yep.
or near the ocean, they can be very therapeutic. So walking in nature. And then as people can get more energy, then it might be some gentle, very gentle cardio. Because what we're aiming to do is use up the stress hormones that have been triggered, the cortisol, the
Yes.
adrenaline, and noradrenaline. So, and certainly resistance training is fine as well, but it's that gentle cardio, mild to moderate cardio, which is using up the stress hormones and calming the whole system down. Yeah, which we find most effective. And then if people are back to full health, then certainly things like interval training,
Yep.
cardio, resistance training, all the good stuff that we know that people can do. That's all great stuff to keep the nervous system calm. And we know that with the brain as well, physical exercise is brilliant at increasing resilience. So mental and emotional resilience increases when we have physical resilience, which is why all of these things are completely linked together.
Yeah, you really made a good point about the stress hormones because people don't realize, but that stress hormone response is really about mobilizing glucose and energy reserves so you can fight and flee. The problem
Mm-hmm.
is most people aren't fighting and fleeing from something where they need that additional fuel for their muscles. So you have all this adrenaline and cortisol that's mobilized all this glucose, but then you're not using it, and that glucose tends to start getting stored back away as fat a lot of times. That's why the more stressed you get, the more you can start storing fat. Because it's like you're eating a bunch of carbohydrate and sugar, and you're not using the fuel. And so getting a little bit of walking or movement in there starts to take all that stress hormone and glucose and start to burn it up a little bit so you're not storing it as fat. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Absolutely. And not only that, there's a feedback loop between the body and the amygdala, the paraqueductal brain,
Yep.
which is the brain says, I'm in danger, triggers these responses, but also gets feedback from the body as to whether we're in danger. This is the kind of kinesthetic response. And so if the brain detects that the muscles are tense, right, we're physically feeling the effects of that anxiety, it interprets that as a reinforcement that we're in danger and therefore creates more danger response. Which is why when you physically feel anxious, you get anxious about feeling anxious. You get
Right.
stressed about feeling anxious. And that's that secondary loop that occurs. And in fact, for us, chronic anxiety is partly as a result of the anxiety about the anxiety. We don't like the sensations, the physical sensations and the emotional sensations of anxiety itself. And therefore, physical movement, physical activity really stops the feedback loop and is able to calm the whole nervous system down and trigger also the parasympathetic nervous system. So we know that in physical exercise, we're triggering the sympathetic system to tighten up the muscles and get the muscles moving. And then afterwards, the system ratchets down and enjoys a period of parasympathetic response. And, people think, oh, do I have to go to the gym? Do I have to do a hard workout? Brisk walking in nature, which I think most of us, if not all of us, can do, has been shown to be highly therapeutic. So 30 to 40 minutes of brisk walking in your local park, in a forest is supposed to be the best, near the ocean or in the ocean, that can be incredibly beneficial for your overall health.
Love it. Excellent, Ashok. I really appreciate you being on today's show. We'll put a link down below, justinhealth.com/Gupta, Gupta. We'll put it down below so you guys can access the 28-day course. By the way, what's the time commitment to start the course? Is it 20 minutes, an hour a day? What's the initial commitment?
So some of these videos are 5 or 10 minutes, so we don't want to
Great.
overload people. So
So
it's
pretty
like they can
easy.
start off 10, 20 minutes a day watching a video. We give you a couple of free meditations that you can watch as well. And that initial set of content is really for you to empathize in terms of, does this really resonate with me? Is this my experience? And if so, then you can obviously go to the full program and then start the retraining process.
Very good, Ashok. Anything else you want to leave the listeners with?
Yeah, as I said, just believe in in the ability of your body to heal. It will heal. It can heal, and we have that healing ability within us. And also to recognize that whatever you're experiencing, whatever physical assessments you've had in terms of someone saying you've got high viral titers, or this particular enzyme is out of whack. Those physical things are downstream. Yeah, and you will have those physical abnormalities in your body. But let's go upstream. Let's go to the source. And we believe that a source of a lot of our conditions is actually in the brain. Even our gut health, I believe, is ultimately decided by our brain and the interaction between our gut and our brain. Fix this up here, and all the downstream things will naturally take care of themselves.
I love it. Very good. Yeah. When someone says your issues are incurable, that just means the cure is within. So I really appreciate that, Ashok. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.